Persona 5 Royal is my favorite video game of all time. I've put a frankly ludicrous amount of time into this game and have gained an amount of love for it that almost no other piece of media I've consumed can match. From the second I started the game, I was absorbed into a world of unmatched style, fun, and spectacle that still hasn't gotten old even after over 600 hours of playtime. Even past the game itself, I was so enamored by Persona 5 that I made it a goal of mine to absorb every continuation or adaptation of the story, from the anime to the multiple spin-offs that I definitely finished, and even the ongoing Persona 5 manga, that unfortunately didn't quite meet expectations. Today I will be talking about the Persona 5 manga and why it disappointed me. Before we get started, it'd be great if you liked the video for the algorithm and subscribe for more potential Persona content here on the channel. Just like with its predecessors, Persona 5 the game received a manga adaptation of its story not too long after its release. Starting in serialization in 2016, Persona 5, written and illustrated by Hisato Murasaki, follows Akira Kurusu, a so-called delinquent who has recently been put on a year of parole for committing assault. Forced to move schools, Akira's goal is to live under the radar so he can return to a normal life. However, he quickly finds out that won't be as easy as it sounds. Yes, this manga is just the story of Persona 5 Royal, with Royal in parentheses, we'll get to that later. I love this story in game, so there's no way I'll have any problems with the manga, right? Wrong. Very wrong. The very beginning of this manga is where I start to have problems. The format of Persona 5 is that of a flashback. As soon as you start the game, you're thrown into what is pretty much 70% through the story. You're essentially given a bunch of abilities you don't know how you got and have a group of teammates you don't know the identities of. This is where you're captured by the police, told you were sold out, and you get interrogated by Sai and Nijima. You then retell the events of the game from April when the story starts to November where you are captured. As you progress through the story, as you meet your teammates and confidants, the game will flash forward to the interrogation. This interrogation is vital to Persona 5 as it's how the game's biggest plot twist and its most important day is conveyed to us. Without the interrogation, all of the build-up, the mystery to who sold you out, the information that is conveyed to you is gone. One of the main methods of driving the story forward is completely missing up until Kanashiro's arc. The entire point of the flash forward story-wise is for Joker to get Sai on his side in order to avoid assassination by telling her the events of the game from the start until the present. She starts off extremely untrusting of you, and as you tell her more and more, she begins to realize you're telling the truth, and then by the time the big day comes, she's willing to help you out and save your life. The events of Kanashiro's arc are what convinces her to start taking your story seriously. Instead, this pivotal moment is only half present and is mixed with the scene from the beginning of the game after you are arrested. With the earlier interrogation scenes gone, it just feels like this manga is speed running the story. Now, Persona 5 is already a dense game, with most runs of the vanilla version ending up being around 90 to 100 hours long, so I can see why some things like entire sections of palaces were cut for the manga. At that point, I should just go and play the game. Hell, I can understand why confidants themselves aren't here. None of the anime adaptations of any of the Persona games were able to successfully integrate social links because they take up way too much time. But I don't see the advantage or sense behind the absence and rearrangement of one of, if not the biggest plot point in Persona 5. But enough of hanging on to that. When it comes to telling the stories of these separate arcs, I think this manga does okay. It tells the stories the way it happens in the game with no missing or additional events for better or worse, although some things are moved around. Due to this, it ends up feeling like this manga is extremely fast-paced. For example, the manga takes finding Kamoshida's treasure, Ann's awakening, and the Kamoshida boss fight and combines them all into a single event, which just feels way too fast for me. There's also little to no downtime between arcs. Persona games can be split into two halves, social simulator and dungeon crawling. The dungeon crawling is where you can find all of your action, and the social simulator is usually where you get most of the story and spend all of your downtime. A big part of what makes these games feel alive is the overworld. You are able to explore the world and take part in any number of different activities. These activities are what fill your downtime, from fishing to playing darts to going to a maid cafe and so much more. Your downtime is important so you don't drown in constant story threads and dungeon crawling, and this manga lacks that downtime and moves way too fast. The funny thing about saying this is, even though the pacing is quick, this manga, since serialization, is only at size arc at the time of this video being written. This wouldn't be a problem since both the Persona 3 and Persona 4 manga lasted for around 10 years, and going by the vanilla version of the game, it's looking like Persona 5 will take around the same time. However, this is not a vanilla manga. The manga has been going on so long that it was able to retroactively add in both Kasumi Yoshizawa and Dr. Maruki from the Royal re-release. This means that this manga will also adapt the third semester content, extending its life even further. As far as how these two were added to the story, it's kind of weird. Kasumi was introduced practically the same way as in the game, but moved up in the timeline. But Maruki was introduced to us through a sci flash forward instead of being organically introduced to us, and it just feels weird, but it's fine, I guess. To add on to this already significant extension due to the royal content, around chapter 72, a normal chapter that would be around 40 pages or so is now split into .1 and .2 chapters, with each chapter coming out bi-weekly, so there's really no telling when this manga will actually end. All this is to say, don't read this manga if you haven't already played the game. It tells a story at far too fast of a pace while reading, and it's coming out so slow that it's just not worth waiting 2 weeks for what is essentially crumbs of story content per chapter. The art style of this manga is where I tend to see most complaints online, and yeah, I see why. To give it some credit, the Kamoshida arc is probably the best this art style has looked in this manga, especially within the first few chapters, which I think actually look really good for the most part, and it definitely has its moments, but it's past this where a lot of the funky faces and interesting angles start to be more prevalent, and it kind of just takes me out of what I'm reading at times. I mean, I would say that if this manga wasn't hard for me to get into in the first place. I feel like this manga can be very visually uninteresting at times, especially so in the metaverse sections where things are supposed to be their most flashy, where the most action takes place. But these fights, these action pieces, don't flow well at all. They are uninteresting. I can understand that translating a turn-based combat system into a manga isn't the easiest task, but there's gotta be something you can do to make it interesting. It's outside of the metaverse where we spend a lot of our time, where this manga is at its most boring. Persona in general, but especially Persona 5, not only tells a story, it tells a story with style. From the menus to the UI and even the text boxes themselves, the game is filled with life. And of course it would be difficult to translate this life from a game to a manga, but it can be done. Hell, it's been done with Persona 5 Mementos Mission, but that's a discussion for a different day. Overall, this manga just feels flat to me in almost every way. Its paneling and art is very basic, and it doesn't generate any sort of emotion within me. To put it in a nutshell, this is Persona 5 without seasoning. The last thing I want to touch on is the main character himself. When it comes to adaptations of Persona games, something I pay attention to especially close is the personality of the main character. Persona protagonists are silent characters, under the control of the player themselves, and their only bit of consistent characterization we get for them is through their backstories and their dialogue options. Previous Persona adaptations, like the Persona 3 movies for example, decide to take one set of dialogue options and build upon them to build a compelling personality around the character and their backstory. And with Akira Kurusu, I can't say I hate him or anything, but I do think he's my least favorite version of the character. Like with the rest of the manga, he just feels very bland, the most basic interpretation of Joker you can get, which is hilarious because out of the 3 modern Persona protagonists, Joker is the most expressive in game. He talks the most and has the most personality between the 3, but every iteration of him outside of spin-off games and Mementos mission seems to fumble him entirely. Nothing about Akira Kurusu really stands out to me, and that's literally all I have to say about him. So, should you read this manga? Well, go ahead if you want to, I don't control your life. I think a more apt question is, do I recommend this manga? And the answer is an overwhelming hell no. Unless you are insane like me and need to consume the entirety of Persona 5 as a title, then you really won't be missing out on anything by not reading this manga. Due to its fast pacing and slow release, rearrangement of certain events, and overall boring presentation, this is a very botched way of experiencing the story. Persona 5 Royal and Vanilla Persona 5 are the number 1 and number 2 ways to experience the story, and it really shouldn't be done any other way, because nothing gives you the experience of the game better than the game itself. I've been wanting to make this video for a while, about 6 months or so, but I wasn't really sure how a Persona video would do on this channel, but I decided to just go ahead and bite the bullet and try it out. I'm also very interested in doing reviews for the Persona 3 and Persona 4 mangas, as well as Persona 5 Mementos mission, so if you enjoyed this, let me know by liking the video and leaving a comment down below, and do the same if you'd like to see me move to more review-based content in general. That's it for this one.
Lately I'm feeling so cool. Yeah, come and get a taste of the hip soul food. Spice up the animal with neo haiku. While soul goes to school, way slash kung fu.